So we're going to speak about ephemeral data today and look at it from a forensic perspective, specifically a digital forensics perspective. I am the Senior Vice President, Global Head of Forensics Investigation for a company here in the United States and also globally, known as Sandline Global. We're an e-discovery firm, and we provide services to our clients in terms of matters of litigation or investigation, from anything related to data collections through the production of data for litigation or court, etc. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me, the evolution of data sources over time, discuss ephemeral messaging and ephemeral data in general, and then look at kind of some of the complexities that we're dealing with from a forensic collection and processing standpoint. I really would encourage everybody to ask any questions that you may have today. Again, very excited to be presenting to everyone this afternoon. So a little bit about me. I've been in the industry for a couple of decades now. I'm currently in private sector. I started off my career teaching law enforcement, state, federal, and local law enforcement on matters of digital evidence, computer crime, things of that nature, and then got into private sector. I maintained multiple licenses within the industry, including specific tools like EnCase, Access Data, and some other notable ones. And also I'm a PI in the New York, Michigan, and South Carolina states here in the US. I've also written extensively for industry publications, including PI Magazine, where I actually author the Cyber Sleuth column, and then author of 3 books in the last few years. You can follow me on LinkedIn to hear a little bit about more of what I do in terms of content creation. So in today's world, we have a constant flow of data. It's really important to start with this so you can see the evolution of data over time. When I had first started doing forensic collections of devices, this was related to computers and external drives, maybe some thumb drives or external hard drives. And then we would go and look at the network file server. Of course, email has always been pretty prevalent and involved. And then mobile devices started to come into play. Now we're also talking about databases, websites, social media, Internet of Things, you name it. We pretty much have come across it, especially in the amount of time that I've been doing this. So it's been an evolution, and we as a society are increasing our digital footprint exponentially year by year. It's pretty amazing the volumes that we're seeing. So ephemeral data, now you see it, now you don't. We're going to talk about this complexity that's, now within a lot of the messaging apps and other programs and things like that we use, where your data is short-lived. We have data that may last for seconds, it may last for minutes, weeks, things like that, but it has a shortened lifespan compared to traditional instant messaging data sources that we have. These utilities or these apps allow the users who use them some capabilities to also set some parameters around how their messages are going to be either received or read or whatnot. So the users have some level of control. And this is pretty significant in the sense of what was potentially available to users when SMS and MMS came out as a standard. Some of the ones, and we're all pretty familiar with icons these days, Snapchat, Signal, Confide's another one, WhatsApp, Telegram. These are all common examples of ephemeral messaging apps that we use today. Here's one that I use. I use pretty much all of them in different capacities. I'm one of those users that kind of shifts gears between using the native apps and then moving on to other apps. But you can see here, this is my personal Signal account. I communicate with my wife, and here I'm showing how you can set the specs on messaging to disappear after a certain period of time. Again, you can do it based on seconds all the way through weeks in this particular app, and every app has different settings, which means that that message is not going to be available to the people engaged in that conversation with you when that specific period hits. So what are the drivers for use? Particularly in business, you have a lot of early adopters. A lot of people like to be on the cutting edge of technology, especially with these types of apps. They have a good feature in terms of data security and privacy because they use end-to-end encryption, so your communication is protected. You have some level of privacy. But with some of these, it goes to even the extent that people who are receiving your messages may not even be able to take screenshots. In fact, when you try to take a screenshot of a message in one of these apps known as Confide, it'll actually blacken out that portion of the app. So there's a lot of privacy here. So a lot of businesses see the security aspect and the privacy aspect as a main driver for use in their particular organizations. And there's also the data retention issue, right? Sometimes, you use these tools, these apps, and they just, people like to delete everything. Why keep it? Well, if you're in a specific industry or business that's highly regulated, then it's going to be important for you to have this communication archived or saved or basically not delete itself. So a lot of organizations are implementing policies and procedures on how to basically preserve or capture this information. Now, we are post-COVID, but during COVID, a lot of people were outside their office. And just in general, as our workforce has shifted to more of a hybrid offsite model, we're having a lot of people use their own devices, the BYOD, the flexibility with regards to people using different types of devices in maybe their home setting or on the road. Because some organizations don't even have a single office. They may rent space out. So these are just reasons why a lot of people have kind of shifted towards these types of apps in general. But if you're in a highly regulated type of industry, you want to make sure that your users, your employees are following policies so that you can comply with the rules of your particular industry. These are, for example, the financial industry or medical related industries, things like that, where there may be a retention period that you need to follow. So not only has this kind of gained the attention of users in the business space, but you think of it from the regulatory side, where our U.S. Department of Justice actually provided some updated guidance and said to people that if you're going to use these types of apps, okay, we need to make sure that you turn over these types of communications. And if you do not turn over these types of communications, this may not help your case. So it may, cause you to be scrutinized. So you want to make sure that you're taking precaution. So that's from the business standpoint. Now, from the individual or person standpoint, these apps have been seen in a lot of matters involving illicit activity. So, for example, insider trading, situations even involving, cryptocurrency being used, cyberbullying with social media. Snapchat chat is very, very popular here in the States among the teens and young adult generations, and even corporate espionage. So I've seen a lot of this type of activity, this ephemeral data, as an investigator, primarily just going out and collecting this data and seeing its impact. So the data is gone, right? We all know that when you delete a message or you delete a file, the data we say is gone. Well, not always the case. It depends on many different factors. With ephemeral data, the same answer applies here. Well, it depends. There still may be data on a local device, and we'll talk about that because it may be in a backup. It may still be on the server of the service provider. So if you use Snapchat, for example, or other services that are cloud-based and you delete something on there, they may actually have it for a very certain period of time, but you got to act fast. So it's really important to know that if I, am going to teach anything today, it's that ephemeral messaging has its complexities, but you have to move fast because once it's gone, it may be gone for good. So some of the considerations in terms of our, looking at this type of data and dealing with this type of data goes into a couple different factors of, what tools will we use to preserve and collect. First, we have to identify the app, right? So these tools also allow us to see what apps are installed on people's phones. That's a very big thing. Now, a lot of times you hear in today's, world of people being very nervous about giving up their phones. So when you're doing an investigation specifically of cell phones, things like that, you want to always take note of what type of app people are using to communicate with. Now, if you're like me, I may have an Android, I may use the Android text messaging with certain people I communicate with. But then if I speak with my wife, I use Signal, and maybe my wife is distracted and she uses the native app because she also has an Android, and then we continue to talk in Signal. And so people have different habits in which they communicate. So we have to think about, what type of phone they have, what type of operating system, what type of app, right? But we have to go a step further because we have to know what type of version or the version of the operating system, the version of the ephemeral product, because this stuff, as you and I all know, because we use it so often, changes so frequently that there have been instances where I've been given the request to go and do a collection at a specific time the next day, and overnight an app updates itself or the operating system updates itself, and then my ability to actually collect that particular data from that app may be impacted, right? So we have to really, in this industry, it's like being a digital fireman. We have to go with the flow. We have to think on our feet, and we have to always be ready to improvise and to jump into things and to figure it out sometimes, unfortunately, on the fly. We have to look at if the tool supports this app that we're looking at, this targeted app. But if it doesn't, that's okay. So what we like to say is that if the tool does not have support, maybe we have a different tool. In fact, within my organization, I have 3 different tools to handle cell phone collections or tablets. That allows me to ensure compatibility with some of the more prevalent types of tools that are out there, so that I know that, hey, if I'm trying to use one of the 3 major tools in the industry and there's zero compatibility, or this end-to-end encryption is causing an issue, I need to take an alternate path, right? My job is to document what I'm seeing on these devices. Now, when you look at somebody's phone and you think about all that's on there, don't get blinders to just say, my investigation's about communication, so I'm just focusing in on text messages. You want to also think about the different ways that people are saving data on their phone. So, for example, I may think something's really funny that my friend said something, and I may forward that to somebody else. And they take a snapshot of that particular conversation and send it off as an image. So the photos may be very, very important. It was interesting because I was working in investigation where we were interviewing, we did custodial interviews. That's where you go and you talk to the people and you figure out where they're saving data and if they have relevant data. So everybody was focused in on the text message. Hey, did you text anything about this project? And I said, why don't we look at the photos also, because we're talking to people that are working outside of a stationary office. They're field technicians. They could have some photos, especially if they're doing stuff on grounds, on property. So sure enough, we looked at photos. We found valuable information there too. Now, if I know that my message is going to disappear in a certain period of time, because that's the person that I'm communicating with has that set up, and as a recipient, I can see that. To preserve that, I may want to snapshot it. This happened on one of my cases. People were dealing with crypto, and they saw that the messages were going to disappear. And as a result, a lot of people were taking snapshots. Again, you have to think about the tools that you're using, but you also have to think about the apps, and maybe the apps have restrictions, and based on the subscription of the person, also, you may be able to have some additional functionality. Some of these are free, others would be where you can pay for functionality, higher subscriptions, things like that. Do backups exist? Really important, because you may have an iTunes backup, and that iTunes backup may have all those WhatsApp messages from a specific period of time. How many of us actually use the backup also on iCloud or Google Drive, things like that? Worst case scenario, and not the worst really, because this works too. I've done it on many, many cases. You think about how many phones and how many apps come out every day, every year. The forensic tools may not, and they do not always keep up. So we may have to use physical documentation by way of photography and transcription. So a photograph would be really helpful to show, a judge, a jury, whomever, what it looked like on the screen. And then a transcription of that, if it needs to go into an affidavit or be translated, things of that nature. Considerations also include, how am I going to get access to these apps or the data off the device? And so that may require you to log in to the product as well as have some multi-factor authentication. So, we may get into an app and then all of a sudden it says, "Oh, give me that code that that is going to come to your phone as well." And this is kind of the complexity of this. So it's gaining a lot of traction. We all may see it in different ways out there where people are using Snapchat, Signal, Telegram. I once had a client who said, "I have such important information to tell you, but we can only talk in Telegram." And I said, "I don't use Telegram." "Well, you need to download Telegram." And then when you start seeing how much security is involved with this, you think of this as a potential challenging and even a nightmarish situation for an organization that is highly regulated, and they cannot have people putting on just any apps on their phone. They don't know who other people are communicating with. They don't know where the data is being sent. So a lot of companies, besides having written policies, actually implement and they put forward these software products called MDMs, or mobile device management programs, which allow organizations to regulate and provide different levels of permissions to either install or have some level of control of what is being put on those devices, for good reason now. But there have been many, many cases where people have these apps and you can still glean information from them. So although, for example, Snapchat, has these disappearing messages, I'm sure many of you have heard of cases where people are screenshotting those messages and people are preserving it. And that's been very, very helpful, like I said, in several different cases, not only in dealing with spoliation, which is the destruction of data by a party that's in a litigation, but also in cases where we only thought this existed in one place. So keep an open mind. Think about it from all your different investigations. There have been many, many different apps that have now implemented these types of features. Think about it in your own practical usage. If you want to be more of an archiver versus more of a, just get rid of stuff. I like to have good data hygiene. You have to make these decisions based on your user preference. However, from a business perspective, you definitely want to take into consideration, what's important for your business needs. However, also need to comply and consider those rules and regulations based on the specific industry that you're operating in. So I stopped there. Want to ask if there are any questions from the audience at this point.